Thank you. Each year at the Ethical Society of St. Louis, we organize our programs around a theme. Our theme this year is Building an Ethical Future. And in September, we're exploring the future of communication. To speak to that theme, it's now my pleasure to introduce Tony Messenger, who will give a talk entitled Ethics and Journalism. Tony will be talking about his work in ethical challenges, as well as what he foresees as the future ethical challenges in journalism. Tony Messenger is a Pulitzer Prize-winning Metro columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. In 2019, he won the Pulitzer in commentary for his series of columns on debtors' prisons in Missouri. His first book about that same subject, Profit and Punishment: How America Criminalizes the Poor in the Name of Justice, was published by St. Martin's Press in December. On a personal note, I come from a long line of newspaper readers. When we first came here in the late 70s, we had the Post delivered to our door. Each morning, after immediately recycling the sports section, I read it from A1 through the comics. But as we all know, newspapers have suffered falling revenues and subscriptions for a number of years. In St. Louis, we recently dodged a bullet as a New York hedge fund wanted to purchase our paper. Normally, such purchases are followed by the elimination of news staff, reduced coverage, and increased profits, while driving the paper to impotency or out of business. Over the years, as the Post has had to let go more and more of its staff, I would say that I would continue to subscribe unless they let Bill McClellan go. Well, Bill has survived in more than one sense, but I don't say that anymore. In the last few years, I tell folks I will continue to subscribe to the Post as long as Tony Messenger and his kind of journalism are part of the Post. Mr. Messenger and the Post staff are my heroes. They uncover corruption, foolishness, skullduggery, and plain incompetence. They hold our elected officials, businesses, organizations, as well as individuals' feet to the flame of truth and public exposure. Without their efforts, we would be, well, it's a word I don't want to use in this forum. It is with great pleasure today that I get to introduce my personal hero and to publicly thank him for bringing what is hidden to light and making our communities better and more informed places. I give you Tony Messenger.
The good news is Bill McClellan's going to survive all of us. The man is a medical miracle, I swear. So as I was walking in today, a gentleman asked me, did you go to college for journalism? And actually, when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a Catholic priest. So giving me a podium and a microphone on a Sunday is a bad idea. You're all stuck here for the next hour and a half. Thank you for those who invited me. I didn't become a Catholic priest. I discovered beer, women, and journalism, not necessarily in that order. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. One of my first journalism jobs was as editor of a small weekly newspaper in Colorado. And every winter, the ski country folks in the mountains would invite journalists for a media day, and we would have these skiing competitions against each other. And obviously, they had an agenda. They wanted us to promote tourism and skiing and know about the various resorts, and they would move us around year to year to different resorts. And many of us in journalism would go to that media day and think, you know, not much of it. We were journalists. They were inviting us. We were having fun on the slopes for a day. And one of my colleagues, Mark Orenshall, he was the editor of the Canyon Courier, and I was the editor of the High Timber Times. And we would go to this together, and our two newspapers would compete. And when we went to go have the breakfast bagel that they laid out for us before we hit the slopes, Mark wouldn't ever take the bagel. He was like the only one who wouldn't eat the bagel. It's like, why aren't you eating the bagel? We need some energy. And he said, well, you know, my personal journalism ethics are to never accept, you know, a gift from anybody in the course of my work. And I said, well, gosh, we're not paying for the skiing today, Mark. That seems to be a little bit of a bigger deal than a bagel. And but I respected that decision, and I remembered it because it's a nature of what ethics in journalism actually looks like. You know, we think about those big moments that end up in movies like All the President's Men and Spotlight and that sort of thing. But the reality of journalism and ethics is that there are little daily decisions that decide how we go about our practice and how professional we are. And that's why the Society of Professional Journalists has a code of ethics. And it's got 4 general prongs that I want to talk about through some of my experiences in journalism. The first one is to seek the truth and to report that truth. Second one is to minimize harm. Third one is to be independent. And the final one is to be accountable and transparent in your work. Those 4 prongs are supposed to generally guide journalists in their daily ethical decisions. So I thought I'd talk about a couple of different situations to bring those to light. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote a column about judicial independence in this country. And I tied it back to a series of stories that I was writing in 2007. I was the editorial page editor in Springfield, Missouri at the time, at the News Leader. And it involved a gentleman named Ed Martin, who used to be the chief of staff to Governor Matt Blunt at that time. And what had happened was somebody in the pro-life community had sent me an email that Mr. Martin had sent out on government email, encouraging political activity against the governor at the time, who was Jay Nixon. Martin is a Republican, Jay Nixon is a Democrat. And somebody let me have a copy of this email because they were offended by it. They thought the governor's office shouldn't be using public resources for campaign purposes. So I filed a sunshine law request for that email. And I filed it in a way to let them know that I already had the email. Because I wanted them to know that they were in a trap that they couldn't get out of. They were either going to confirm to me that they were using public dollars for campaign purposes, or they were going to deny me access to the email and violate the sunshine law. And I didn't care which one they did, I just knew they were going to do one of them. So they chose door B and violated the sunshine law and said that the email no longer exists, that they had destroyed it. I wrote about that, filed more sunshine law requests. Everybody else in the state started writing about it. It became a story here in St. Louis, in Kansas City, everywhere else. And a whistleblower in state government, a gentleman named Scott Eckersley, called me up and said, you know, they're violating the law, and I told them not to do it. You should ask for those emails too. And this started a massive controversy of sunshine law violations in the state government. During that process, Ed Martin became sort of the target of even people in his party. And state lawmakers wanted to hear from Ed Martin, to have him explain all of this stuff that they were reading in the newspaper about the state violating the sunshine law. Keep in mind, this was 2007, and Republicans still cared about the sunshine law. So Ed Martin schedules a phone conference call with Republican state lawmakers. One of those state Republican lawmakers calls me and says, hey, Ed Martin's having a conference call with us. Do you want to listen in? Of course, I rubbed my hands together and said yes, but this immediately spurred a series of ethical conflicts in my mind. For those of you who have sat through these conference calls, frequently there's an automated voice that says, announce your presence and who you are and who you're with. There are often very organized concepts to make sure that only the right people are on the call. So I sat with my editor and I said, here are the ethical considerations. I'm not going to lie to get on this call. I'm going to make it clear to the state representative who invited me on this call that he can't lie. that if there is a person on the call that asks, is there anybody here on this call who's not supposed to be here, I have to leave. If they do that to you, I have to leave. We went through all of these conversations, had them with my editor, had them with the state representative, said, here are all of the circumstances that could happen, in which case I have to leave so that I don't lie, so that you don't lie, so that we don't get this information through some illicit process. The state representative agreed, my editor agreed that we had covered all of our bases. I went to this state representative's house, and again, keep in mind this was 2007, and it was Ed Martin, who isn't the smartest person in politics. And the state representative calls in. Nobody asks anybody to identify themselves. Nobody asks if there's anybody who's on the call who's not supposed to be on the call. And he puts the call on speakerphone, and I take notes during the entire call in which Ed Martin lies through his teeth to the state lawmakers about what's actually going on. I proceed to show the documents to that state lawmaker and other state lawmakers who were on the call to show them that Ed Martin was lying. They expressed their anger to me that Ed Martin was lying on that call, and I wrote a column about it. It was kind of a big deal. The governor's office was very angry. And staff members from the governor's office sent a letter to my editor. They sent a letter to the publisher. They sent a letter to the CEO of Gannett, who owned the newspaper I was working for, and the general counsel of Gannett. And they said, Tony Messenger is unethical. He should be fired. And they outlined what they thought had happened. Again, those of you who have been involved in a corporate environment know that it doesn't matter what my reputation was at the time. When a CEO and a general counsel get this sort of letter, they're very worried and immediately scheduled multiple conference calls that I had to sit in on and explain myself. But myself and my editor walked them through the entire process and how we had communicated with each other beforehand, and how we had thought about all of the decisions that we would make and all of the points at which we would step off from that story. And they agreed that I didn't do anything unethical, that the newspaper didn't do anything unethical, and they sent it back to the governor's office and told the governor's office to go pound sand. I think they did it more nicely than that. I don't remember the exact wording of the letter. One of the things that I remember about this situation that guides me in a lot of my daily interactions as a journalist is that the thing that I did well, that I think some of us as humans don't do well when we face an ethical situation, is I sought advice from others immediately. I think what often happens in ethical situations, and I will just, refer to, personal situations, not even necessarily professional situations. We've got that little voice, the little angel on one side and the devil on the other side. We know we're about to make a decision that involves us having to question whether or not we're making the ethical choice. And we often don't ask that outside voice because we don't want to know the answer. This was tough because I knew this was going to be a good story. I knew this was going to be a big story. I knew Ed Martin was going to lie. And I didn't want to give it up for anything. But I knew in order to get that story and be proud of that story and be able to survive that story, I had to seek outside help. I had to make sure that there were others who knew what I was thinking about doing and give me guidance and listen to my plan and make sure that we had a discussion and even a debate, if necessary, on all the ethical requirements. The part of the SPJ code that I think happens most frequently in my job as a Metro columnist and is a little bit hard to define is the minimize harm. It reminds me a little bit of the doctor's code of ethics. But I frequently have stories in which I'm writing about people in their most vulnerable state. And I'm blessed that they trust me with their stories. People who are homeless, people who are accused of crimes, people who have been or are in jail and prison, people who are living in poverty, people who are sometimes continuing to break the law as they explain their circumstances to me. And I sometimes have to make decisions that are complicated that may mean I don't get a column. During my debtors' prisons columns, there were a couple of people that I was interviewing in Dent County who were on the lam. They were supposed to have turned themselves into the court or to jail, and they were not in jail because they knew what would happen to them once they got there. They knew they would be there for a very long time. They knew that the jailers were not behaving ethically, and they were telling me their story to help explain some of the problems with the Dent County jail and the justice system in general. And when I interviewed them and met them, actually met one of them in a house that I knew to be a house that was a drug house. And I knew to be in places that I probably shouldn't be in, generally speaking. But they had a story to tell, and I needed to meet them where they were comfortable. When I wrote those columns, I had to do a couple of different things. I had to explain to my readers that they were indeed on the lam. They were indeed some people that were required by the court to show up and did not, so that I could be honest with my readers about letting them make a judgment of the folks I was writing about. But I also had to minimize harm to them. I wasn't going to tell my readers and or the sheriff's department where they were. I did have to explain to the attorney of the newspaper that I had this information and was not going to give it out should the sheriff or the prosecuting attorney or somebody else to try to subpoena me in that situation. One of the people who was a source for that story is living in St. Louis now. She's done her time in prison. She's drug-free. She's living her life. And she called me a few days ago, well, not a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago now. And her daughter had a baby. And Children's Services took this baby because the daughter is in a methadone clinic trying to get off of drugs. But when you're on methadone, you produce the same sort of drug test as though you were on opioids. And Children's Services took the baby. And Children's Services was not behaving well. And I've written a lot about Children's Services. They're a troubled department who deals with very difficult decisions that they have to make every day. And this woman trusts me and wanted me to help tell her story of her grandchild and her daughter. And I wanted to tell the story, and it would have been a very good story. You haven't read that story in the column because I haven't written it. Because I asked her an important question. I said, what happens if this column doesn't do the good that we think it might do? What happens if Children's Services decides to retaliate before your daughter gets her baby back? Because that happens. I happen to have been working on another column at that time involving a lawsuit in southeast Missouri where a children's service worker did exactly that. And the appeals court said, yeah, that's okay, they can do that. And so we had a conversation, and I didn't do the column. And I don't know if it was the right decision or the wrong decision, but I didn't want to do more harm to any of the people involved in this story. So I didn't write it. A couple of years ago, I had another closed meeting similar to the Ed Martin situation that involved a complicated set of ethical decisions. I had been writing a series of columns about the veterans home in North St. Louis County and how veterans there were being mistreated and some of them were dying, and the Veterans Commission in Missouri was not doing a very good job. And in those columns was putting pressure on Governor Greitens, who was the governor at the time, to try to do something about that home and improve staffing and improve the care that the veterans were getting. So at that time, the governor did react to the story and did start to try to make some improvements in the veterans home. And one of the things that he decided to do was replace members of the Veterans Commission who I had heard were probably going to fire the person who was leading the Veterans Commission at the time, General Larry Kay. So they had a public meeting, scheduled a meeting. I was not able to make it to Jeff City for that meeting. One of our reporters in Jeff City was. But I asked one of the board members for the call-in number for the meeting. And they gave me the number. It's public information. There was nothing inappropriate about me having that number and calling that number. I dialed into the number. Somebody answered. I identified myself. This is Tony Messenger with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I'm here to report on the meeting. They're like, great, good to have you. Other board members who weren't in Jeff City called in. People were gathered. They had the meeting. When they got ready to go fire General Kay, they went into closed session. And somebody at the meeting says to the people that were there present in Jefferson City, if you're a reporter here in Jefferson City, you need to leave now. We're having a closed session. They didn't turn off my phone line. They didn't tell the people on the phone they had to hang up. I immediately emailed my editor and said, call our attorney. I'm sitting in a closed meeting on a call in which I identified myself as a reporter. They haven't turned my phone off. I intend to stay. Let's find out if I can report on this. So I stayed and listened to the meeting, and I listened to them fire the general. And I listened to the general ask them for things and them deny him those things. And it was a really interesting situation because you don't very often get to listen to a public body fire somebody. And during that process, I let our other reporter know that the general had been fired so he could report that. We discussed with an editor and the lawyer exactly how we would go about sourcing that, and we got it out there that he had been fired. The meeting was over. They saw that the story was out that he had been fired, and all of a sudden it hit somebody. Oh my gosh, we never asked Tony Messenger to get off the phone. Tony Messenger must have been on that phone. Let's send a letter to the Post-Dispatch saying that Tony Messenger is unethical. And they did that night. And they threatened us again with all sorts of legal things that never happened. But what's interesting about this story is I continue to be upset about how it ended. Because what I did at that point was write a column that I believe fulfills that fourth plank of the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. Be accountable and transparent. I wrote a column that explained exactly what I did and how I got the information, and then shared more details of what actually happened in that meeting. I reported the truth and told it. And I filed this column with my editor, and we called the attorney. And the attorney was a little squeamish because we had just been threatened with legal action. Attorneys do that sometimes. Their job is not to win cases. Their job is to keep us out of cases so that we don't have to spend money on them, even if we're going to win. I was in the right. We were never going to face any true legal jeopardy. But had I written that column, I wouldn't be surprised if the governor would have taken us to court and it would have cost us a lot of money. So we decided not to run that column. It really disappointed me because the thought in the political community from people who had known that I was on that phone call was that I might have done something unethical. And it was very frustrating for me not to have the truth out there. The person who actually gave me the phone number was pretty upset at me for a period of time because she didn't know the full truth of what happened, and I wasn't able to tell her the full truth of what happened until later. Be accountable and transparent. It's such an important part of how I think we live our daily lives and how journalists do their work, particularly in an era that we are in today, in which we are constantly under attack from various folks who attack us not because of the work that we do, but just because it's part of their agenda to diminish the flow of free and accurate information. But I love that last bit of advice as it relates to journalism ethics, because I think it's something that is important to apply in our daily lives too. Be accountable, be transparent. I'm a parent. I have 6 kids, 9 grandchildren. I have, at times, as a parent, been somebody who loses my temper occasionally. Sometimes badly, never physically, but I have a very loud voice, and I've scared my kids a couple of times. And I'm not proud of that fact, but what I am proud of is that in those moments when I've lost my temper with my children, I remember almost every incident, whether it's later that night or the next morning, where I go sit down with them and I tell them, I'm sorry. I was right to be upset. You shouldn't do whatever it is you were doing. But I'm sorry I lost my temper. I should do a better job of controlling that. And I hope that to some degree in their lives, eventually, it's that moment they remember more than the temper moment. Because that moment of being accountable and being transparent in our actions just lets my children know Dad's human too. I write a lot about people who are in very difficult situations in their lives. And they share their stories with me in hopes that I will somehow improve their lives or improve the lives of other people who might be in that situation. And I always try to tell them the same thing. Thank you for sharing your story with me. And I can't promise you that this is going to make things any better. I always want them to know that. And then I tell them the other thing. Don't read the comments. I want to stop there and actually, for the purposes of the next bit of time we have together, read the comments, hear from you, and have some interaction, questions back and forth, whatever you want to ask about, whether it's ethics in journalism or anything else that you want to talk about.
And we will do that after we're finished with the rest.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do that in a little bit. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you having me today.
The ushers will now take up a collection to support the society. If you're moved to donate today, we appreciate anything that you may be able to offer. We rely on the generosity of our members and friends to ensure our community can keep providing our many free programs. If you don't have cash with you, you can donate at ethicalstl.org/donate. Very cleverly written there. Or use the QR code, which may be behind me. Or even better, become a pledging member. If you're interested in joining the Ethical Society, our membership coordinator, Laura, will be available afterwards to answer your questions. We'd love to keep you informed about our future events at the Ethical Society of St. Louis, and if you'd like to join our weekly newsletter, use the QR code above me to sign up. I have one announcement here. Local honey is being sold in the Becker Room today. All proceeds go to the International Institute to benefit immigrants from Ukraine and other countries. James has a couple of things that he wants to say, and then we'll call. Okay? Well, let James talk first. James isn't here. Oh, here he is. Okay.
I was just making my way.
I see.
Good morning, everyone. First, I wanted to thank the many of you who came out on Thursday for our Meet the Janes event in support of reproductive justice in Missouri. It was incredibly heartening to see almost 200 people here to view that documentary and express their support for reproductive justice. It was, however, a little less heartening to note that I would say it was about 80% women. And I wanted to take a moment to say, guys, you have to step up and support reproductive justice. You can't just let women do it. And to that end, you have an opportunity for redemption, which is on September the 29th, not this coming Thursday, but the Thursday afterwards. The Society will be hosting a second event. It is a fundraiser for the Missouri Abortion Fund, featuring Liz Winstead, the co-creator of The Daily Show, and our own local abortion rights heroes, Reverend Tracy Blackman and Rabbi Susan Talvey, who are both friends of the Ethical Society and have been here numerous times. You can buy a ticket for that event for $25, and the proceeds go to the Missouri Abortion Fund, but also our own group of activists in Activist Academy is organizing a silent auction to happen concurrently with that event, and we are seeking donations for the silent auction. So if you have something, a skill, an object, a piece of art, an experience that you would like to donate, we would like to raise tens of thousands of dollars for the Missouri Abortion Fund on that Thursday, the 29th. There are flyers for the event downstairs by the back door as you leave. So pick up a flyer and all the information is online. So I hope to see many of you there on September 29th for Justice and Liberty for Abortion. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Next weekend, September 24th and 25th, is Tower Grove Pride. The Ethical Society had hoped to have a booth. Unfortunately, due to some logistical challenges, we won't be able to do that this year, but I want to thank Bradley Schutz, Becca M., and Kyle Niehaus for having volunteered. If you can, please go to it on Saturday, or on Sunday, come here, go to the activities fair, and then go to Tower Grove Pride. Hope to see some of you there. Thanks.
One other announcement, I don't have it printed, but on Monday night here in the Becker Room, there's a live stream of a program sponsored by the Climate Action Now group here. It's a live stream from New York City about Project Drawdown and the climate change and the climate crisis. So bring something to eat, we'll have drinks, and invite you there. We will now have our final piece of music by Amy Kamey. to break that mood with my voice, but okay. Thank you for being here today, for each other and for yourselves. After this meeting, we invite you to continue your day with us. Join us for discussions of the talk in this room. You can ask Tony your questions. If you're joining us online, please write your questions into the chat. We'll read them here and answer them. Or, if you would prefer to hang out and make friends with new folks, you should join us downstairs for coffee. If you're new and would like people to say hi, grab a yellow mug. We hope today's gathering helped you feel more connected to other people, gave you new and interesting ideas, and inspired you to think about the values which guide your life. To end our program, I invite you to greet those on either side of you, and I wish you all a good week.
Hello, everyone. We are going to begin the Q&A session in about 3 minutes. So this is your 3-minute warning to either take a seat and join us to ask questions, or type your questions in the chat if you're online. And if you are not joining us for questions, this is your polite, friendly reminder to leave this room and continue your conversations elsewhere. Okay, Jake, let's take the music down. Are you good sitting there? Yeah, that's fine. We have a mic for you as well. You just need to turn it on. And then bottom here, because this is actually the transmitter. So just
Testing.
There we go. Perfect. So I'm just going to open to the floor, and we're also checking all the questions that you might submit online. So if you're interested in submitting a question online, send it through in Alta, and I will get it on my phone. It's a whole magical system that actually works. We've gotten very good at it. So who would like to ask Tony a question? Great. I'll come back to you. I saw Robert's hand first.
Hey, Tony. Robert Matajesic from St. Louis, Missouri. So do you ever think meetings should be closed in public discourse? Do you think there is a good reason for that? It seems like a lot of your issues are coming from these closed meetings. These aren't military matters or matters of national security. These are run-of-the-mill type of things. Shouldn't the public have access to these types of meetings, and should we get rid of closed meetings altogether?
So I do think there are times when it is appropriate to close a meeting, but I believe our public bodies in Missouri, and probably most states, but my experience here, primarily in Missouri, we close way too many meetings. The Sunshine Law, as it's written, allows a closure of records and allows a closure of meetings, but requires it hardly ever. And yet, a lot of these smaller bodies, school board bodies, municipal bodies, sewer districts, fire districts, those sorts of things, they're influenced by their attorneys, and their attorneys almost always advise them to close things. I know through my experience from filing requests for minutes of closed meetings, and the law allows for those to be obtained if votes are taken, that there are lots of things discussed in closed meetings that shouldn't be. And sometimes it's just because government's hard. And when you're trying to decide whether to fire a director who's paid with taxpayer dollars, yeah, some of that's theoretically personnel, but most of it really isn't. And your public officials know when they go into the game that they're doing public jobs, and they have to be prepared for that. So I think there is an entire ethic, and I think it's Republican, Democrat. A lot of these smaller bodies, are even sometimes nonpartisan bodies in which they believe that the public's right to know doesn't really count in those circumstances. I think it's a real problem in government. And people don't often know about it or care that much about it until it involves the development of the property right behind their house. And then that's all of a sudden they do care, and they realize, wait a minute, you've been doing a bunch of this stuff in closed meeting. Why have you been doing that? And that's when folks get engaged and all of a sudden care about open meetings and open records.
Thank you. Carol.
I just had an incident on Monday. I went to a doctor. He said I was fine in 5 minutes. He was sorry to waste my time. And then he went on to prophesize that I need to believe in Jesus, because otherwise how am I going to atone for my sins when I die?
During a medical appointment?
MD.
Wow.
Okay. I have been president of the Ethical Society. I'm a member for 40 some odd years. I went to I'm on the board for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And they said, oh, you have to call the hospital and you have to call the Post-Dispatch. Well, I did call the hospital, and I got the supervisor of patient care, or whatever the title was, and they said they would take care of it, and I called my doctor. And I felt guilty because I let the conversation go on, but as was said at the beginning of our platform, I was so deprived of intellectual stimulation that I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I went on to do it. And he was totally inappropriate. And I felt I did the right ethical thing by informing the hospital.
I think you did. Those situations are so tough sometimes because you're just shocked.
Well, I was shocked. I was. But more importantly, he's very young. I think he just finished his medical training. And I wanted someone to say, okay, this is not appropriate. I'm not looking for him to be fired. And hopefully that was done. And I did call my doctor that referred me, and he said he will take care of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully he's a young doctor and he can be counseled in that situation. But to the larger point that I think you're kind of making, this is a really difficult time in our nation with all of this sort of Christian nationalism. I am, as a matter of faith, a Christian who feels very uncomfortable with a lot of the folks who practice my faith these days, because I don't want my faith to have anything to do with the government. And it's very frustrating to see some of that. And unfortunately, it's creating an opportunity in our schools I love that book. I bet you it'd be banned in Rockwood schools these days for daring to open up children's minds to different ideas. So it's a worrisome time as it relates to that. And I say that as somebody who, in my entire life, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up Catholic. I'm now sort of a independent Christian who's just sort of lost at the moment because of this movement in the Christian faith in our country right now. And it's offensive to me, and it's bothersome. And I worry that we've unleashed an entire younger generation to not understanding the concept of separation of church and state, which obviously that's not exactly what that was, but it hits into that whole deeper theme.
I'm not sure.
Well, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I already gave the mic to Don. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Hi, Don Beer. I've been worried about journalism for 15 years because it's a crucial countervailing force vis-a-vis government and other issues. And so I'm wondering if you could make comments about that, because as monies reduce supporting newspapers and other kinds of journalists, there's much less support for that, and in particular investigative journalism.
So I've been worried about it for at least that long, maybe longer. It was at least 25, 30 years ago where there was a lab that the Knight Foundation funded in Colorado, not far from where I was practicing journalism, in which they started to produce the first sort of tablet newspapers. And the professor there, who I think is at the University of Missouri now, was predicting the end of print. And to some degree, he was predicting what we all see now in terms of on our phones and our tablets and the way that we consume journalism. I'm grateful that he was wrong about the death of print. We still exist, but we don't publish as many daily newspapers as we used to, and that's worrisome. And our financial model is constantly changing, and that's worrisome. I try to be an optimist. I still have a job, and I still work for a company that cares about journalism, and I hope that continues. But we are at a difficult time, and the same folks who are attacking democracy are attacking journalism at the same time and making it harder for us. And I constantly worry about it and just keep my head down and keep practicing journalism and hope that helps, eventually turn the tide.
I'm going to go to a question from online now from George, who asks, does journalism have to be about big political things to be important and impactful?
It doesn't, but it has to impact the politics in some ways to truly be impactful. And I'll use my Debtor's Prison series as an example. There was nothing inherently political about that series, and I would regularly get emails from folks who described themselves as being on the right side of the spectrum, and they would begin their email, I normally hate your column, but... and then they would say, you've really identified something with these folks living in poverty, having their liberty taken away by the criminal justice system because they're poor. And it really helped inspire me to keep writing about that, because I knew I was reaching an audience that I could keep in some capacity if I kept driving this story home. But for that story to matter, ultimately, I needed the legislature and a unanimous Supreme Court to make a decision in Missouri that poor people can't be put in jail because they owe money on a previous jail stay. And so the politics ultimately did matter to some degree, but I got there by not talking very much at all about politics in that story. A lot of this, I find myself conflicted a lot lately because I don't want to write about politics as much as I used to write about politics a lot. And I find myself shying away from it and writing about people more and trying to have an impact on people's lives. But I feel really guilty because I don't want to ignore the dangerous place of where we are politically as a nation. And what I found through my Debtor's Prison series was I can reach people on the right who are brainwashed if I mention the word Trump or I mention the party politics or anything else, but they still get some of the stuff that I write about in my column when I'm writing about folks challenging the tyranny of big government if they're homeless or poor or drug addicted or whatever else. And so when I write about those topics and focus on the injustice in society that doesn't connect necessarily to right or left or D or R, I think I have more impact. And I reach some of those folks who might still write me an email that says, I normally think you're a something or another, but I liked this column.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is kind of about the future and what you can see coming up. I have a broadcasting and media background, and when I was in school and learning journalism, there were the laws that we kind of learned about with plugola and payola and like what you alluded to in your speech a little bit of like not taking gifts and like, you know, trying to be very in the middle ground about what you're reporting on. And in the early 2000s, it seems like all of that went away, and then there's social media and there's native advertising that is just, you know, most people don't even know they're reading a news article that's not actually news. It's sponsored because, you know, Colgate paid for them to have this, you know, top 10 ways to, you know, brush your teeth or something, but it's really something that's been advertised to them. Do you see any way or any conversation like about how there will be any kind of regulation in the future of kind of going back to some kind of standard of finding, you know, because influencer culture, all of that nowadays is just such a blurry line?
I think for us to get there, we kind of have to hit rock bottom, and we're not there yet. I think a lot about, you know, several years ago there was some discussion about bringing the fairness doctrine back as it relates to the radio and TV airwaves. I can't imagine that getting through Congress right now, but I'd like to see that discussion because I think it would change the tenor of some of the really far right-wing stuff that we see. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd love to see us get back to that stage. I'll give you a local example of that involves me, that's on one hand deeply offensive to me, and on the other hand, my company seems to be making money off of it, and so if it keeps me employed, more power to them. But as some of you know, over the last 2 or 3 years, I've written a series of columns about a federal prison halfway house in North St. Louis called the Dismas House. And the Dismas House was run by a particular family that was taking this very expensive federal contract and paying themselves massive amounts of salary out of this nonprofit. And it was really offensive behavior, and I uncovered it and wrote about it, and they lost their federal contract. Then they got it back because the federal government gave that federal contract to somebody who has an equally questionable ethical background. They realized it after I reported on it, took the contract back from that person, and now the previous unethical folks still have it while it's being bid again. Anyway, I've written several columns about this. It's been a big deal. I've been pleased with the impact on the community of these columns. And about a month or two ago, one of those advertorials that you're talking about showed up on our website about what a wonderful place the Dismas House is. And folks saw it on social media and sent it to me and said, what the heck? Your company is promoting this nonprofit that you wrote about in a series of hard-hitting pieces of journalism. And it was a complete, whitewash sort of advertorial, and it was pretty offensive to me. Luckily, I was working on another follow-up that I published a few weeks ago concerning their latest 990s that they filed. And so it's so weird because, my company's making money off of that, apparently. I'm sure as heck going to continue to do my journalism. Nobody's told me to stop doing my journalism. But they're out there promoting that. And when you do Google searches these days, sometimes the advertorial shows up before the journalism. And it deeply concerns me that, had Alden, the hedge fund, been successful buying us, that would be a little bit more of our future. I'm happy to say that in my time working for Lee Enterprises, nobody's ever told me to do anything unethical. Nobody's ever stopped me from doing good journalism. It's only been encouraged, and that's good. But I do worry about the overall financial pressures in the industry. We just saw a story a few weeks ago about how Politico now, which has a lot of influence in DC politics, is owned by a German industrialist who's sort of a right-winger. And that's going to have an effect on, political coverage coming out of DC coming up on an important midterm election. So that kind of stuff worries me.
I've got another question from online that treads some similar ground about the commercial interests in journalism and how it affects you. I can't see who this person is, but they ask, do you choose particular stories to report on because you think they will sell newspapers? How does the commercial impact of what you're writing factor into your decisions?
So I've never chosen a story because I think it will sell newspapers. But in the new digital world, we track our digital marketplace. And I do know that some of my hard-hitting journalism on certain topics does very well digitally. Generally, it's my best journalism, and so I just focus on the idea of do good journalism, and it will, it will do well. Nobody tells me to do a particular topic because it will do well online. And ironically, in my particular case, there's been this national fear of CNN is trending to the right again because Trump sells. And, I worry about that. But in my particular case, Trump doesn't sell. Local journalism that has an impact sells, that people care about. And so the good news is, no, I don't pick a particular topic because it will sell newspapers, like the old concept of if it bleeds, it leads on TV. Good journalism does do well digitally. And my Debtor's Prison series did well digitally, and people care about it. And so I tend to focus on those topics.
Great, that's heartening to hear.
Hi, my name is Kathy Schrank. I apologize if you covered this during platform. I was with the kids in Seek, but I was wondering if you could speak at all to nonprofit journalism models, and if you think that's viable in any, in medium-sized markets or any size market, really.
So I think it is. I like the nonprofit model. We've seen some of that here in St. Louis with the Beacon, which was started by a bunch of former Post-Dispatch journalists, and then they sort of merged with the local NPR station, and they're still doing a lot of good journalism. It's not the Beacon anymore, but it's just sort of merged into their journalism. The Missouri Independent is a nonprofit that got started up to cover Missouri politics, and they're doing some very good work and some investigative type work. ProPublica is a national one that's starting to focus on some local journalism markets. The Marshall Project, which is a nonprofit that writes a lot about criminal justice reform, some of the same topics that I write about, is starting to investigate opening up local nonprofits, including in St. Louis. So yeah, I like that because it gives a good place for journalists to go, in which they will be hopefully funded well. And what a lot of those nonprofits are trying to do is develop cooperative relationships with the mainstream press. So, for instance, last Sunday, the lead story in the Post-Dispatch was written by Jeremy Kohler, a former colleague of mine at the Post-Dispatch, who now works for ProPublica. Now, I would have loved for that piece of journalism to have been produced by Jeremy Kohler while he was still working for the Post-Dispatch, but hey, it's running on our front page, and it's serving the purposes of both his nonprofit and our, mainstream newspaper. And so the journalism is getting done. That's where I think these nonprofits are really important. The journalism's getting done. The danger, of course, is who are the donors? Are they transparent with the donors? Are those donors having an impact on coverage? And that will be the question. And so, getting back to the SPJ Code of Ethics, that last item of be accountable and transparent, I know the Missouri Independent has a page on their website where they publish their donors. I think if the nonprofits that get into journalism tend to follow that model, then they're going to be successful and contribute to the overall body of knowledge in our democracy.
Thank you.
So we have time just for a couple of very quick questions. I'm going to ask this one from George online to make sure that he gets to ask his question. How should a young, aspiring, and disabled journalist go about making an impact?
Well, when I speak to young journalists, I talk to college classes and high school classes these days, and I tell them, first of all, you have an advantage that I didn't have starting up, and that is that you have the ability right now to speak to people as a journalist without getting hired at a mainstream publication, because you can do work on social media that is journalism, and you can blog, and you can video, and you can find a platform that exists for journalism right now. And that's how I encourage them. And I say, you should be writing right now. You should be considering yourself a journalist right now and looking for those outlets that didn't exist when I was coming up in journalism. So that's first of all. And then secondly, one of the things that I think, to get back to this previous question, that is changing about journalism is that a lot of these nonprofits are finding niches. People want to find outlets that reinforce their beliefs or write about topics that they care about, and the nonprofit journalism world is trying to fit that model. So there are political nonprofits, environmental nonprofits, criminal justice reform nonprofits. So as a young journalist, disabled or not, whatever your topic is that you happen to care about, educate yourself in that realm and find those organizations that exist that might help you practice that form of journalism and get published. And then it's the same as it ever was. Get published, develop a resume, and go forth and prosper.
Thank you. I hope that helps, George. So does anyone have a very brief final question? Everyone's nervous to ask the last question. Okay, final question. Huh? Oh, right at the back? Okay.
All the way in the back.
And then I'll go to Robert. And I'll come to you.
You've been in a lot of high conflict situations. Does it take a toll on you? What do you do to kick back?
It does occasionally take a toll on me. I remember, I think I wrote about this at one point. I'm pretty sure I wrote about it in my book. There was a moment after Ferguson, after 2 or 3 weeks of writing really intense editorials and and going to experience the protests and getting tear gassed for the first time, where on a particular Sunday I was at church with my family, and songs started playing, and I just broke down crying, and I was just at this moment where the stress had gotten to me, and I didn't realize it. I used to golf when I had more time, and I don't golf as much as I'd like to. I drink beer. Later this afternoon, I will be watching my Denver Broncos, hopefully not lose like they did last week. When they win, it relieves my stress. When they lose, it adds to my stress. And I always tell people, you do not want to be the subject of my first column after the Broncos lose. So to Judge Stephen Privet, who is the subject of today's column, I apologize. There was some Bronco anger in that column there. So, but that's an important point. The job is stressful, and I write about difficult topics. And I've always had, I think, a good handle on my mental health. And so I try to be aware of things when I know that I'm a little bit stressed. I try to get away from the job a little bit. And I noted on Twitter the other day, the Chief Justice for the state of Missouri, Missouri Supreme Court Justice Paul Wilson, gave a speech to the Missouri Bar last week in Springfield. And the first part of the speech was entirely about mental health in the legal profession, because there have been some high-profile attorney suicides in the last 4 or 5 years. And I was so heartened to see the Supreme Court Justice dedicate about half of his speech to that topic, because it's not something that people like to talk about. But it's a reality. It's a reality in lots of different professions. And you know, the best thing I try to do is be aware of it when I'm occasionally a little bit stressed, and just walk away and enjoy my family and my grandkids, and try to refresh myself that way.
Thank you so much. My last question is about what journalism do you choose to support? So clearly, we should be supporting the Post-Dispatch, but if you had other sources of journalism that you would recommend, amplify, I would love to know what you support.
Well, you know, I mean, I subscribe to the New York Times, I subscribe to the Washington Post, I subscribe to the Denver Post and the Colorado Sun, because I'm from Colorado, and I you know, like to know what's going on there. You know, I think just, you know, if you have a hometown that you want to stay in touch with, subscribe to that local newspaper in some capacity. Even that's the good thing about the digital world, is you can subscribe without spending a large amount of money, relatively speaking, compared to a daily newspaper subscription. I found myself, it's interesting, now that I've published a book, I am in a world that I wasn't in before as an author. And so I have lots of people who want me to read their book, within the journalism world in particular. And it's opened my mind to some things and some topics where, you know, that's the other thing that I would say. Go to Left Bank Books or wherever you like to buy books, Subterranean Books over in U City, wherever, and you know, buy some of the best journalism that gets done in this country that's often in book form, and support you know, good journalism in that capacity as well.
Thank you, Crystal, for that great final question. I would just like to invite everyone to thank Tony Messenger one more time. We really appreciate you coming and spending your time with us and being so generous this morning and this afternoon. It's one of the privileges of serving the Ethical Society that we have amazing speakers like you. If you are around next Sunday morning, we are having a presentation from Matthew Facciani, who is a researcher into misinformation and how misinformation is going to potentially get worse and more dangerous in the future. And he's going to talk about his research into how we can fight back against misinformation. So hope to see you next week. Thank you for being here.